thinking about quantum computing today. This is probably way premature for anybody to get too riled up about, but what got me thinking about it was I really like this site, which is BTC Illustrated. They talk about different parts of Bitcoin, the technology, and one of the things that they mentioned was this, like what could happen if there was an actual quantum computer, and then if there was a quantum computer, how might that computer be used to steal money from the unwary in the world of Bitcoin? Lucas, I know you've been looking into quantum computing a bunch, or at least been thinking about it. Should we talk about transaction hijacking and what might be some of the mitigations for this?
I think we should talk about it. And you've probably been seeing my tweets. There's all this talk about Bitcoin strategic reserves, but I think in so many people's mind, there's this notion that they can buy Bitcoin and put it in a wallet and put that wallet in some piece of hardware and lock it away, put it in a salt mine in Kansas, as if that's going to be a solution. If they're not looking at it, that wallet still exists on a chain. And I'm very concerned that people don't understand this latent vulnerability, especially in a world that we're emerging of much more sophisticated computers than our traditional processors. And you know, that's where quantum computing comes in. And since 2019, you know, Google had some claims about achieving quantum computing. I'm not I guess deeply in it enough to understand how much of this quandary, this problem that they solved. But we know that there are many players, including nation states, who are trying to develop very sophisticated computers. And I think especially those people who are in crypto and are thinking about monies that exist in distributed networks that you know, are information that are publicly shared, should be very concerned about this.
All right, well, let's talk through what this attack looks like. So in one of the standard ways that we do payments in Bitcoin is we do a thing called pay to public key hash. So this is this P2PKH, and this is not that much different from what happens a lot of time in Chia, because we're paying to something called a puzzle hash. And that means that we're essentially using the standard transaction in Chia, which ultimately is a public key that's put into a puzzle. So what we're talking about here is there's a point at which the public key is revealed. And you do this when you're actually going to spend a transaction. So what they're talking about here in this little graphic is what happens when you reveal that. Well, your transaction goes into something called the mempool. So the mempool is this public space where all transactions are waiting to be picked up and then put into a block. And so at that point, this is where the vulnerability exists to a quantum computer. Because what a quantum computer could possibly do is, given a specific public key, find the private key associated with that coin and then spend it somewhere else by using a technique called replace by fee. So replace by fee was a Bitcoin improvement, which what it was originally intended for was to say, you submitted some transaction, it's sort of stuck in the mempool, you didn't put a high enough fee on it, and now it's just sort of hanging out in limbo for maybe all eternity. It really depends on what the mempool purging policy is for various Bitcoin full nodes, but like it could get stuck in the mempool for quite some time. So the idea there was you could replace the existing transaction as long as it met the criteria of it spent the original UTXO and it had a higher fee. So that's what replace by fee was. So in this scenario, what happens is you've revealed the public key, and so now your quantum computer can go to work. As long as that thing is still hanging out in the mempool, there is a chance that it could get replaced by feed, and then that replaced by feed transaction will be picked up by a miner and put into the next block. And that would essentially steal your funds. So just like you can steal your girl, is steal your funds. That's what the quantum computer could do. But it has to compute that private key. So there are quite a few things that Bitcoin best practices has been saying for a long time, which is you should not be reusing addresses. You should be using a new address every time. So don't just have a static Bitcoin address. Don't have everybody keep paying you to the same thing over and over again, because if you've ever been paid once, then the public key has been revealed. And so essentially, if you're reusing addresses, you are more vulnerable to this than anybody else because your public key has already been revealed. So if you're following best practices, then there's this very limited scope of time where you may be vulnerable to this. But if you've been receiving Bitcoin repeatedly to the same address over and over again, your public key's been out there for a super long period of time. And if I had a quantum computer, I would start looking at those right away. I mean, be the first funds you could go steal is you could just basically go sweep all the Bitcoin that you want where anybody's reused an address. So first off, don't do that. You should be not reusing addresses. And we have better technology than using this type of pay to public key hash. We've got silent payments now, and silent payments are by nature never going to reuse the same type of payment because it's a combination of the block and a public piece of information that you've given together. So there are ways to do this better, but a quantum computer is definitely going to be trouble for Bitcoin. And the one mitigation that actually was talked about in the comments on this thread was that you could have a private mempool, and that is a pretty interesting thing. A private mempool would mitigate this because it would mean that the public key was never revealed in a way that anybody else could see it until it actually went into a block. So I think you're going to start to see some innovations in the world of private mempools, and we've already seen this a little bit, definitely within the last cycle, where we had some folks, individuals that were making inscriptions and ordinals, and they were buying entire blocks, and they were buying those off market. So we've already seen in the last cycle or during the downturn bear market where a lot of the runes and ordinals and some of these innovative things that people were testing out on Bitcoin, where we've seen the use of private mempools and accelerated mempool access and buying entire blocks OTC. These things have already occurred. So I think that this is the way that people are going to protect, even in the world where we have some kind of quantum computer. This is a way to do that. Now, you still have to trust who's ever running that mempool, who's ever doing that mining. And this is another reason why having access to a significant amount of mining is a very important thing, because you can make a block and submit that block to the blockchain, and there really wouldn't be a way to subvert that unless you could essentially do a 51% attack, because you'd have to make a whole bunch of blocks to replace that. So this private mempool thing and having access to hashing power is the way you would protect your funds in the world of a quantum computer. You just have to have a lot of hashing power so you can make a block at some point. Now, it means you might have to wait even longer to get your transaction through, because not only do you have to wait until your transaction would get confirmed, but in this scenario, you'd have to wait until you could make a block, until your particular syndicate or whatever that was collected together had the ability to do a just-in-time mempool submission to ensure that this window was as small as possible.
It's interesting to think about these private mempools and also a Bitcoin that exists in the future with fewer and fewer and fewer block rewards, and an ever diminishing supply of Bitcoin to be released. It also makes me wonder what the mining or the consensus security of Bitcoin will look like what it'll look like whenever whenever all of the Bitcoin have been mined too. Maybe we're going to see a whole lot more of these private mem coins. Private mempools that are that are rewarded. So
So the space to look at if you're trying to catch up on this stuff is PQC, post-quantum cryptography. And NIST actually has some details about this. There have been a few projects. There's actually been some recent activity on this. So if you're looking at this, August 13th of 2024 actually had some advancements here. So there's some things to check out within this. Another thing that I was catching up on in prep for talking about this today was a PQC technology that's worth reviewing, which is called Falcon. Let me throw that on the screen here if I can actually get my windows rearranged.
Bweedle and good morning, Bweedle comments that quantum computing is still a long way into reality, but I don't know if you caught the UAP hearing that was held in Congress the other day. It just got me to thinking. We've seen advancements in quantum computing made by private corporations, Google, IBM, in the last couple of years, but watching that hearing, catching a little bit of it, and some of the phenomena that actually exist, and I don't know if you saw that a lot of these unidentified objects seem to be centered around or be very interested in nuclear sites that we have here in the United States, and possibly defense technologies made by some other country to hamper or watch our nuclear capability. Just got me thinking. I wonder what other advancements have been made in secret around the world. So good point, Weedle, but still something I think that we should be thinking about here with regards to crypto. So what do you got here with about Falcon?
Well, so Falcon is one of these post-quantum cryptography things. So if you see it there in that header block, it's a PQC type. So these are a classification of cryptography types that are resistant to this. I think resistant is probably the best word for it. It's not necessarily guaranteed that you couldn't in some other type of configuration maybe do something, and this is all cutting edge kind of stuff because the quantum computers that we've got right now are very power intensive. They have a limited number of qubits. There's a lot of errors that can come into play with how it computes things, and so this is still very much emerging technology. And I think even with some of the quantum computers that exist, this isn't like some different type of processor. It's like an entire apparatus, because oftentimes these qubits, they have to be kept at specific temperatures. So you have to run these things at really, really low temperature. They have to be cold. Sometimes people talk about doing this in a different way and maybe not requiring this, but it's not where we're at right now. I think here, this is like this is the prototype or whatever, and you can see this thing doesn't look anything like any computer that most of us are used to, like, which is some little chip that goes onto a piece of silicon. Look, this thing looks like some kind of weird apparatus out of the future. This is what these things look like, because they're definitely non-standard in their construction.
It looks like a virus.
Well, it's this big apparatus. It's a lot of metal and cold and cooling and kind of moving things around. It's yeah. I mean, if you think back to what transistors used to look like, I mean, vacuum tubes and whatever, these things change over time. Who knows? Maybe somebody will make a smallish type of qubit that can run at room temperature, but I don't think we're there anytime soon.
Remember there somebody solved that. It was on Twitter a couple months ago. Now, did you happen to catch Eric Weinstein talking about, well, as we have this conversation too, I think about the lead that the NSA, that the United States government had on cryptography before it was discovered, or it was figured out in the public realm by PGP. And I don't know if you've heard Eric Weinstein talk about suspicions that he has about what's going on with some of the math departments and physics departments. But he was very interested in the University of Texas at Austin, and also University of New York, Stony Brook. So
Yeah, I caught some of it. I know that he's been talking about the fact that there's science and mathematics that are sort of not being looked at as seriously, and that there's some red herrings that are out there. I think what he was talking about, string theory being one of those, that is an absolute dead end. And I know that it's been criticized quite a bit in the long term. But well, you really want to get us off of quantum and talking about other stuff, don't you?
Well, I just
focus on quantum here.
I mean, no, I actually think it has a lot to do with quantum, but anyway, I knew that you liked, I know you listened to at least a little bit Eric Weinstein, and this is something that he had brought up. So just an aside, but let's get back to quantum.
Right. So part of anything like this is saying, can you do it with quantum, or can you do it in some other way, right? And this is where this graph makes some sense. And actually this article, which we'll have in in the show notes, where MIT is talking about some of what you need to consider with respect to quantum, because this is saying, is there a different way to do it? Like a quantum computer oftentimes can do the same type of calculation, but arguably could do it faster, right? Like computing a singular private key, if you take the normal way that you would do that, it should be something like the heat death of the universe, right? You've seen some of these estimations for how long it takes to find a particular private key. But if quantum can do that in seconds or minutes or whatever, then you've done something orders of magnitude faster than anything else. And so if your quantum computer can do it like that, then you have a distinct advantage by building and running that quantum computer, because you can do some computation that otherwise is infeasible to do in any normal way. So that's kind of what's being discussed in this graph and what's being talked about here, because when you think about quantum computing, you're really thinking about, can we solve a problem that would be otherwise unsolvable through normal means? And when we're talking about the signature types and Falcon and post-quantum or whatever, it's also good to review exactly the signature types that are being used. Is essentially, in Bitcoin, we've got like these two types that we're using, which is the ECDSA and then the Schnorr signatures. In different blockchains, we're using different signature types. Like on Chia, we're using BLS. So knowing what signatures are, kind of how these things work, is pretty important. But the fact is, I think most of the blockchains that are out there are not using PQC signature types. So this may be something to watch for in the future. If quantum computing really ends up happening, you might see where Bitcoin has to bring something like this in. Not only might have to bring something like this in, but might have to rethink using SHA-256 as the basic hashing algorithm. But this is all software, so it's not like by saying any of this that Bitcoin is screwed, or it's screwed in the long term, because we got to go back to that idea of how could you secure coins that like existed prior to quantum in a way that exists post quantum. And that, I think there are mitigations, but like the primary one is you should not have a lot of coins sitting out there with any public key that's been revealed. That's just number one, because with a public key hash, the chances of you actually cracking that thing are are pretty low because you don't really know what it is that was paid to. There is a lot of security and just not really knowing exactly how the transaction worked on Bitcoin because it's got this hash. So, it makes it even that much more intractable that a quantum computer could crack it. And just following that first basic guidance of not reusing addresses is one of the first mitigations. And that's even something people can do right now, is just say, if you've been doing that and you're holding a significant amount of coin on that address, you should just move that. Like, that's not a good thing. Like, just get it to a different address, don't reveal it, and start having better hygiene around how you're using addresses on Bitcoin.
The Schnorr signatures, the BLS signatures, I see that they are elliptical curve. This notion of elliptical curve cryptography. Are the quantum resistant algorithms based on some other notion of cryptography, or are they more is there more math or more sources poured into the elliptical curve to make it
Yeah, I think it's this thing called lattice based. I mean, I don't know that like I'm going to be able to rep this as on a deep technical level. That's not going to be the most successful thing that I can do at this point. Maybe we can get somebody in here that's quantum cryptography expert, or maybe it'd be even something fun to ask Bram or anybody else that we've got that's close by. But I think it's not an elliptical curve type, because that, I think, is fundamentally not quantum resistant. You have to do a different type of underlying mechanism, and I think that's what's being referred to by the lattice based. But yeah, we'll have to maybe save that for when we can get an expert in here, or somebody that listens to the show says, I'm an expert on this. Let us know, and we'll see if we can get you in here. Anyway, so another thing that I wanted to mention and bring up for the sake of the conversation today is that some of the thoughts around how soon we're going to get there, and how much time we have before this may come into play. There's a few places that say 2030, 2033. So it's a few years out, 5-6 years out, but who knows how fast this can really come into fruition. Sometimes these things that have these longer term plans end up getting accelerated forward because of some major development. So you definitely have a window of time here to figure things out, get things into the right disposition. But this may be a soft fork or a hard fork that Bitcoin's facing at some point in the future, and there definitely is a way that it can survive it. I think anybody saying that Bitcoin is fundamentally toast at the time we hit quantum, I think that may not strictly be correct.
That's what I wanted to also ask you. What do you see the future of Bitcoin being like with adopting quantum resilience? Will it only require a soft fork? Is it something that would be a hard fork? And if so, like, is it something that the Bitcoin developers will be sitting on, and at the point at which somebody suffers a quantum, loses Bitcoin due to a quantum hack, then that's what it takes in order to get everyone to adopt a hard fork? How do you think
I think if you had a feasible attack on a revealed public key, this is where I said, like, if I had a quantum computer, what would I do? I would start going sweeping up all kinds of Bitcoin, all these ones that have had these reused addresses. Anytime, and this could be a very simple walk of the Bitcoin blockchain, right? You just look through and find reused addresses, or find any places where you've had revealed public keys and you've had a repeated pay. You're essentially have the attack surface for being able to do this offline attack with your quantum computer. So the attack would go something like this. You just sync a full node and then look through the Bitcoin database of all transactions that have occurred, find where there have been revealed public keys, and then that something is paid to that public key again in the future. Like, so there are unspent coins that have been paid to the same public key, and now you just say, all right, I'm gonna go find the private keys for each of those and just start swooping coins one by one. So, you know, this could be something where you could just go get a significant amount of funds by looking for those particular coins. But for the public keys that have never been revealed, like, I don't think the Satoshi coins were ever revealed. Like, there's never been a public key reveal of any of that stuff. So I don't think that you could actually go for the Satoshi coins, the million or whatever that were produced in those early days. That probably wouldn't be possible, but you could sweep up anybody who have had these bad hygiene practices, and that might look where you just start hearing about people just saying, hey, I lost my coins, I never got hacked, like, what's going on? And if you started hearing reports of that, then you might know that there's a quantum computer out there doing something nefariously on the Bitcoin network, which would be just starting to spend reused address coins.
You know, as we have this discussion too, I think about the suspicions you and Aleph had about early FPGA mining going on in Bitcoin. And I just think about incentives. Because, you know, maybe this wasn't worth maybe it wasn't worth it to do this when Bitcoin was less than $70,000 a Bitcoin, but if it climbs up to $100,000 or more, people try a lot harder. People respond to financial incentives. We certainly know that. So,
plus, it's a feather in your cap when you build a quantum computer and you can break a quote unquote break Bitcoin in some fashion. That's the kind of thing that gets you headlines, it gets you news, it gets you more funding. You know, oftentimes these things are funded through, you know, in a lot of ways. The funding that goes to projects is when they have an impact on the world. So if you've shown that you can break what is now becoming a nation state tool in some fashion, that's going to get you it's going to get you more money for sure.
I thought they just wanted to play chess. What do you think about the thoughts that have been put forth with regards to Jason Lowery and software whenever you think about quantum vulnerabilities in Bitcoin?
You know, the more that I read Jason Lowery's talks about software, he has a good idea. Like, the fundamental of what he's talking about is a good idea, and he gets challenged a lot on trying to actually put that into practice and to defend it. And I see him, it looks like what he's doing is using ChatGPT for his responses, which is pretty surprising, honestly. I don't know why he's doing that. I don't think he gives enough examples for how software actually plays out. And if you read through some of the threads where he starts talking about this, you'll see that people come in and start challenging that. Like, what does this even mean? Like, what do you mean about bit power and all this stuff? And he's really struggles to articulate what it would mean to do this. I would say, first off, in the world of Bitcoin is a national settlement type of transfer payment, right? Like, we've definitely heard nation states talking about strategic reserves. We've talked about El Salvador having their own Bitcoin reserve, and like what these treasure troves of coins mean for these various nation states, and especially if that starts to be some mechanism for the production of debt, right? If we start backing debt with Bitcoin in some fashion, then this type of currency will be extremely useful and necessary. But what it means is that you're going to need to have hashing power to back that up. If we're in a post-quantum world, then this whole idea of having a private mempool where you can produce a significant number of blocks so that you can move things around or demonstrate what you've got appropriately, then you're going to need that, because you can't rely on the public infrastructure to do this anymore. You're going to have your own hashing power where you can produce blocks. So it isn't enough to just have Bitcoin to pay for block space, but you also have to be able to manipulate that block space in a way that isn't subject to some of this hacking style stuff. Because once you put something into the mempool, it's public for the entire world, and it's going to get gossiped throughout the entire Bitcoin network. And that means that monitoring public mempools is going to be something that you start to see more and more of. In fact, if it isn't happening en masse already, I'd be shocked. So this idea of private mempools, private acceleration of transactions, this is what nation states are going to need to be successful in this idea of soft war. You have to have hashing power. You have to be able to create blocks, and it's critically important that you can get the transactions in that you want to get in without having to wait or be stuck behind somebody who's trying to put a monkey picture on the chain.
And there are those monkey pictures. So what are private mempools dependent on a large number of public mempools still being available? I mean, what happens to Bitcoin if everybody's using private mempools?
It still works. It's fine.
It still works. It can still be reconciled as to
well, okay, so there have been pools that have made empty blocks. That's happened, like, shockingly. You'd think, well, why would you make an empty block? Because you're still going to get the block reward first, right? So if you win and just for whatever reason you're like, screw it, I'm not going to put any transactions in here, it can be done. You'll still get the block reward. The whole point of the mempool is to help optimize the fee infrastructure for miners. If you're out there mining Bitcoin, you want the block that you find to be as impactful as possible, right? So you want as many fees. You want to swoop up and fill that block because it's gonna make it more lucrative for you. You're gonna get more than just the block reward from the network, but you're also going to get the fees associated with it. In a private mempool situation, somebody might be paying you significantly more to keep their transactions private, more than the fee infrastructure could ever be with a public mempool space. I mean, think about it. Like, if you're a nation state and you're like, I'm about to move a significant amount of payment from the US to France, like, putting that transaction in the public mempool, probably not the best idea, like, for a variety of different reasons. And if you start to move, billions or hundreds of billions of dollars around, you're probably not going to put that into the public mempool. You're probably going to pay some accelerated, mining pool to just give you the block and make sure that you get it done when you want it done, because you're trying to get it done on some time frame. You don't want to wait, and you want to be very careful about the security of that. In the case where you might have something like this where a hack is possible, like, once it's put into a block, pretty hard to attack that unless you can force some kind of reorg on the chain. And that is entirely larger scale problem than just paying for a private block.
I think you're putting your finger on and the emerging character, the way that Bitcoin is going to look in the future. Because as we have corporations and companies buy up such large piles of Bitcoin and have so much interest in it, and as it gains in value, or the dollar drops in value against it, and not only that, but the rewards that are baked into the ecosystem, those are going to mean less and less and less. So I think what you're describing with these private mempools is going to be the future of Bitcoin. So it's interesting to hear you describe that and think about what that's probably going to look like, because we've already seen a lot of these mining operations conglomeratize large mining operations, and you could see now, especially with the ETF concept and money being layered on top of them, and those transactions being layered on top of them, that they can be sort of moving their financialization off the chain outside of the ecosystem.
But we got to be clear about one thing about what this is going to look like. The transparency of the public ledger would not go away in this sort of scenario, because we're talking about how do you actually construct a block, right? This is a blockchain. What is it? What does a blockchain mean? It means it's a state of a database, and each block moves that database state forward one square. That block production, once it occurs in that block, which is valid and gets gossiped to the network, will be accepted as the longest chain, because we're assuming that like you have the ability to create a block. Creating a block and then gossiping it to the network means all the transparency that we love about Bitcoin, the fact that it's an auditable public ledger, doesn't go away in the world of private mempools. It just means that you can't see what everybody else is trying to do, and miners have less ability to optimize the fee infrastructure. And I'm saying this is okay. Like, you can still have this public infrastructure where a lot of people are doing this, but you're going to have definitely blocks that come out of nowhere, essentially, that don't have a tie to whatever was going on in the public mempool space. Like, this has occurred, and it's going to get bigger. Like, this is going to be a bigger deal. So the control of the hashing power on Bitcoin, instead of becoming less impactful in the world of there's less block rewards to be had, this is where it's going to be more important, is securing and privatizing mempool access to ensure that you don't have some sort of an errant situation for the mass movements of Bitcoin.
Well,
at least value, not necessarily in volume, but in value. Like, because you could have a UTXO that's got just like an ungodly amount of value in with respect to USD.
Gotcha. Well, that's I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to talk about with regards to the impacts quantum computers are going to have on Bitcoin. I learned a lot today, but I still am very curious. I've had sort of an oblique, just sort of wondering what was going to be happening in regards to quantum computing. Just as I see so many many people talk about these strategic asset reserves, it had been something I had been wondering how vulnerable these strategic reserves are going to be. So I don't know if you have anything to add, but you sort of answered.
Let me just I'll finish up on that. I think to the extent that these strategic reserves are using multi-sigs, that's going to go even farther, right? Because what we're talking about here is single sig, single private key. But if you have more private keys that you need, right? Like, let's say, you're 7 of 11 or something, or whatever number that you want to pick multi-sig. It makes the scope of the problem a little bit bigger, a little harder. The other thing is just having good hygiene, right? Like a strategic reserve or an ETF where they continuously reuse the same address over and over and over again, and then ever move any of those coins off that address, that's problematic. Like, that's the thing that will need to be avoided. So I think to the extent that you have custodians that are acting, or even whatever entity is responsible for these strategic reserves or the ETF coins, they have to know a lot about what the attack surface of Bitcoin is going to look like moving forward, and start getting that hygiene in place. The other thing that's going to happen with the strategic reserves and the ETFs is you're going to start seeing proof of reserves. And by proof of reserves, what I mean is you need to demonstrate that the coins that you have said that you have, that they're auditable through the ledger so that people can go look at them. So you're going to have to publish, the coins that you say you have to produce that manifest. In addition to that manifest, what's going to be required is to show that those private keys are still under the control of the entity who's claiming control of it. It's not enough to just say, yeah, these are our coins, because that's what happened in years past. Like, we've seen where certain custodians have said, we have access to this crypto, and they showed it to an auditor, and the auditor didn't challenge them to actually sign anything with the private keys that were associated with those coins. And so they didn't actually do a proof of reserves. It was more of a trust me, bro, kind of a scenario. where they're showing that they have these coins, but they're not demanding that they use the private keys to sign messages that are specifically originating from the auditor's challenges, right? Which might be, hey, I'm going to take the headline from today's newspaper, like, sign a or sign a message that has these specific words in it to prove to me that you actually have control of the private keys that are associated with this coin. So I think that this is what you're going to see nation states doing, and where you're going to start to see people have real expertise in best practices around Bitcoin to mitigate for any kind of future problems, and just not reusing addresses, like using multi-sigs. These are things that are all well known, and that nation states are going to have to employ to ensure that these large troves of coins that they're in custody of are being properly managed and maintained, and also that they can demonstrate that they haven't lost control of the fundamental infrastructure that's required to move those coins in the future.
So
that's all I've got to say. That's it.
Okay, I was gonna make a joke, but I'm not gonna. Let's close it there. Mistakes were, never mind.
All right. Well, we'll catch you on FoMO next week.
All right. See you next week.